The cold came in through the soles of her boots before it came in through the walls. Mira had learned to read the Thornfield estate by its temperatures. The eastern corridor ran warm in winter because the old pipes still worked there. The council antechamber stayed cold year-round, even in July, because something in the stone itself refused to hold heat. And the hall outside the Alpha's private chambers, that long, unlit passage she had walked exactly twice in her life, had a cold that was different from both. It was not the cold of drafts or old plumbing. It was a cold like held breath, like something enormous waiting in absolute stillness for a reason it did not yet know. She felt it now, standing at the edge of that passage with a summons letter folded in her hand, the paper soft from how many times she had opened and refolded it. In the last 3 hours, Mira felt that cold press up through her boot soles and settle in her ankles, her knees, the base of her spine. The letter had come that morning. No sender name, the pack seal in black wax instead of the usual red. 3 words inside in a handwriting she did not recognize. Come tonight. Alone, she was an Omega, a forgotten one, which was its own specific category, distinct from the merely ignored. Forgotten Omegas were pack members whose registration had been allowed to lapse. No territory assignment, no monthly check-in, no seat at the solstice table. She paid her tithe through a third-party account, so that no one at the pack house had to acknowledge her existence. And they had maintained this arrangement for nearly 6 years with what she had come to think of as mutual relief. She should not have come, and yet here she were her feet on the cold stone, the letter in her hand, and somewhere beyond the unlit passage, the sound of something she could not name, not a voice, not a movement, something anterior to both, a pressure in the air that her wolf had been turning toward for 3 hours, like a flower tilting without knowing there was sun. She had not told her wolf about the summons. She had learned long ago that her wolf's instincts and her own survival strategy rarely agreed. She took the first step into the passage. The cold deepened. Her wolf went entirely, unnervingly still. It had been 6 years since the rejection, not the formal kind. Omegas of her standing did not receive formal rejections. What she had received was something quieter, and therefore more permanent. She had been present at the solstice ceremony as a girl of 19, had felt the mate bond ignite in her chest like a coal pressed against skin, had looked across the fire circle and found the eyes of the pack's young alpha, Calder Vane, already looking away. He had looked away, and then his beta had leaned in and said something near his ear, and Calder had nodded once, and that had been the end of it. No acknowledgement, no fury, no formal severance, because there was nothing formal to sever. Only the coal in her chest going slowly, quietly dark. She had waited 3 months for him to say something. When she understood that nothing was coming, she had begun the process of forgetting herself out of the pack's memory. It had been easier than she expected. Omegas who made no noise were very easy to forget. She was almost at the end of the passage now. A thin line of amber light showed under a door. She had not noticed on her previous 2 visits to this wing. The cold intensified. Her boot soles felt like they were walking on glass, and then, behind the door, she heard it. A sound that was not a sound, a frequency below hearing, felt in the sternum and the jaw and the backs of the hands, like the lowest note of an organ held too long in a closed room, like the word that precedes language. Her wolf did not go still this time. Her wolf lunged. Mira pressed her back against the cold corridor wall and stood very quietly, breathing through her nose until the surging in her chest subsided to something she could manage. Come tonight, alone. She put her hand on the door and pushed it open. The memory of how she had come to be here, truly here, in this life, in this specific diminishment, came back to her, not in the Alpha's chamber but in the moment before it, the way memories always chose the worst possible timing. She was reaching for the door handle, and the past reached back. She had been 17 when she first understood what she was. Not an Omega. She had known that since childhood, the way Pack children learned their designations in the same loose, unkind way they learned everything else about hierarchy. You learned it from what you were not given, from which table you sat at, from the way certain rooms went quiet when you entered and loud again when you left. No, what she understood at 17 was more specific. She was the kind of Omega who had been born to the wrong family at the wrong time in the wrong Pack's particular political moment. Her mother had been a ranked Omega, which sounded like a contradiction, but in the old system it was not. Certain Omegas carried bloodline magic that made them valuable to a Pack's stability. Her mother's bloodline was connected to what the elders called the listening, a gift for resonance, for hearing what the Pack's collective spirit was saying beneath the noise of politics and ambition. The listening was not telepathy. It was not prophecy. It was more like being a tuning fork for the Pack's emotional truth. You could feel when something was wrong in the Pack's body, the way a musician feels a note played out of tune, a small wrongness that nevertheless disrupted everything around it. Her mother had been the last fully gifted listener the Pack had carried. When her mother died, quietly, in winter of the kind of illness that carries off women who have stopped wanting to stay, the Pack had mourned for a prescribed number of days and then moved forward with considerable speed. The Elder Council had been in the middle of restructuring Pack hierarchy at that time, and the restructuring was not kind to bloodlines that did not translate into fighting strength or political alliances. Mira had been 11. The house she had grown up in was reassigned within a month. The small territory allowance that came with her mother's bloodline recognition was quietly folded back into Pack resources. No one took these things from her with cruelty. No one even explained it directly. It happened the way Pack bureaucracy happened when it wanted something to disappear. Gradually, then all at once, in language so neutral, it left no handhold for argument. She had moved into the Pack's communal Omega housing, a converted farmhouse on the western boundary that always smelled of damp wood and too many people. And she had kept her head down, and she had learned to compress herself into whatever space she was given, and she had survived. At 17, she had begun to notice that her mother's gift had not died with her mother. It had only been waiting. It came to her first as headaches. On the nights before Pack disputes erupted publicly, she would wake in the small hours with a pressure behind her eyes that felt like something trying to get through. She learned to sleep with her hands pressed flat on the floor beside her mattress sides. Something about the contact with the earth helped, as if the information needed to pass through her rather than accumulate in her skull. She told no one. She had a very clear sense, even at 17, that announcing a rare bloodline gift to a council that had already stripped her mother's recognition would not go well for her. At 18, she had catalogued privately and carefully everything she could feel through the listening, the Pack's grief over 2 young warriors lost at the eastern border, the beta female's slow-burning resentment of the council's dismissal of her recommendation about territory mapping, the undercurrent of fear that ran through the communal housing every time the Pack's alpha, old Marcus Vane, Calder's father, went into one of his cold rages. Fear was loudest. Joy came through in flashes, bright and brief. Love, the deep, sustained kind, the mate bond kind, had a frequency she had no words for, except to say it felt like standing near something that had been burning for a very long time without burning out. She had felt it once very clearly from the direction of the Pack house. She had been 16. She had been walking the tree line at dusk, because dusk was when the communal housing was loudest, and she needed the quiet. The feeling had hit her like a warm wave, enormous, sustained, ancient, not new love, something established, something that had been burning for decades without burning out. She had followed it, helplessly, because the listening did not ask permission. She had ended up standing outside old Marcus Vane's study window, looking in at nothing she was meant to see. Marcus Vane and his mate Sarah were standing in the study's amber light, not speaking, not touching, just standing in the same room, and the frequency of their bond had been so strong that Mira had felt it in her back teeth. She had stood there for longer than she should have, hand pressed against the cold stone of the outer wall, absorbing something she was hungry for, without knowing she had been hungry. It was the last time she felt anything like it until the solstice ceremony 3 years later. The solstice ceremony was 3 days of formal pack ritual. The first day was for the dead, the pack's annual naming of those lost in the previous year, conducted at the stone circle at the pack's heart. The second was for the young, the presentation of pups, born since the last solstice, carried in arms through the fire circle, while the pack's elder Omega women sang the welcoming. The third was for the mated, the renewal of mate bonds, conducted in the great hall, each bonded pair coming forward to press their wrists together over the fire bowl while the pack witnessed. The ceremony also, almost incidentally, sometimes catalyzed new mate recognition. Mira had not come for that. She had come because attendance was still technically required for all pack members, and she had been in a period of trying to be less invisible. Not more visible exactly, but less absent, in a way that might eventually be used against her. She had braided her hair. She had worn a dress she had borrowed from the girl in the room next to hers at the communal house. She had stood near the back of the great hall, close to the fire exit, in the third row of the General Omega seating. The fire in the great hall fire bowl was lit from a flame kept burning year-round in the Alpha's private chambers. It was the pack's continuous fire, the same flame, fed and tended since the pack's founding. The lore said. The flame held the pack's memory in its heat. Mira had always found this beautiful in a way she was careful not to say out loud. When Calder Vane had come in as the new Alpha, Marcus Vane had stepped down from primary leadership earlier that year, Calder on taking the mantle at 22, which was young. The hall had changed the way rooms changed when something significant entered them, not louder, the air rearranging itself. Mira had felt the mate bond recognition not as a slow building but as a completed fact, there and then total, like a sentence that had been waiting to be finished, and had just been finished without her participation. She had not reached for it. She was not a fool. An unregistered Omega from the communal house is making a claim on a new Alpha at his own solstice ceremony would have been not tragic, ridiculous. She had held the recognition in her chest, the way you held a coal you knew would burn you eventually, carefully, without breathing too hard. She had looked at him across the fire circle. He had looked back. For exactly 4 seconds, she would later count it. He had looked at her with something in his face she had no other word for except recognition, not attraction, not surprise. Recognition, the same bone-deep sense of completed sentence that she felt looking back at him. And then his beta, Gregor Tan, had leaned in and said something close to his ear, and Calder Vane had looked away, and that had been that. She had left before the ceremony ended. She had walked the tree line until the cold drove her back. She had returned to the communal housing, folded the borrowed dress, pressed her hands flat on the floor beside her mattress, and listened to the pack's body all night. Grief, hunger, joy in flashes, love that had been burning for decades. Her own new grief was too fresh to have a frequency yet. It would find one eventually. Everything did. She did not approach him. She did not petition the council. She did not tell anyone. What she did was begin the long, methodical process of disappearing. It took 4 years to reach full forgotten status. She transferred her tithe payments to a third-party Omega administrative service that handled 4 other forgotten pack members in the region. All of them older women who had outlived their formal utility to the pack structure. She stopped attending any ceremony she was not formally required to attend. She stopped attending formally required ceremonies when she calculated that the fine for absence was lower than the cost of being present. She built a small life at the edge of pack territory. A cottage she maintained herself, a kitchen garden that provided for her, and a little beyond, a relationship with the land under her feet that was quieter and more sustaining than anything the pack house had ever offered her. She developed her gift in private. The listening, it turned out, was not only for the pack, or rather, the pack was not only the wolves inside the formal territory boundary, it was the land itself, the watershed, the old stone walls that had been witness to pack history. For generations, the burial ground at the territory's northern edge, where the pack's dead lay under names worn smooth by weather. She learned to read all of it. She learned what the land said about the pack's health, about the season's balance, about the old agreements the pack had made with the territory centuries ago and had since largely forgotten. She learned which springs ran clean and which ran through old grief. She learned where the territorial boundary had weakened and why. Not from aggression or encroachment, but from a kind of spiritual neglect. The pack's attention turned too far inward. The old acknowledgments no longer performed. She also, in the 6th year of her exile from relevance, began to hear something she had no category for. It came from the direction of the pack house, not from the Fa Circle or the Great Hall or the Elder Council's stone chamber. From the Alpha's private wing, a low, sustained frequency, below the range of her ordinary senses, so deep she felt it in her sternum and her molars, and the small bones of her wrists. Not grief, not fear, not the ordinary frequencies she had catalogued over years of involuntary attention. Something held down, something immense and still, and absolutely without outlet, like a voice that had been told to be silent. For so long, it had almost forgotten it was a voice. She had dismissed it the first time. The second time she had sat with it for an hour at the edge of the tree line, hands pressed to the cold earth, trying to understand. The third time she had walked home in a state of disquiet that did not resolve when she slept. By the 5th time, she was listening for it. By the 8th, she understood it was listening back. The summons came on the same morning. She had decided to go to the pack house and ask directly. The timing, she told herself, was coincidence. Her wolf, who had grown very opinionated in the years of quiet, said nothing but increased the pressure behind Mira's sternum to something just short of intolerable. The door opened into a room that was warmer than the corridor by several degrees. She noticed this first because her boot soles registered the change before the rest of her did. Then she noticed the room itself. She had expected an office. It was not an office. It was. She tried to find the right category and could not. A room that had been an office and was now something else. The desk was still there, the chair, the shelves of pack records in their leather bindings, but the furniture had been pushed to the walls. The center of the room was clear stone floor. In the middle of the floor, a single oil lamp, and beside the oil lamp, sitting cross-legged on the bare stone with his back to the door, Calder Vane. He did not turn when she entered. She stood in the doorway. He was thinner than she remembered, not ill but worn down in the way of something that had been burning its own resources. The set of his shoulders had the quality, she had been feeling from the direction of the pack house for months now, held, absolute stillness of the kind that required constant effort. The pressure in her sternum sharpened. Her wolf went very quiet, in a way that was distinct from calm. The way a landscape goes quiet just before weather. "You came," he said. His voice was lower than she remembered, rougher at the edges like stone worn by water. "I came," she said. She did not apologize for being late. She did not ask for permission to enter. She stepped across the threshold and let the door fall shut behind her. He turned then, slowly, as if the motion cost something. His face when she saw it was, she had prepared herself for many things. Anger, dismissal, the specific careful blankness of a dominant wolf maintaining hierarchy. She had not prepared herself for what she saw, which was exhaustion so complete it had gotten past pretense. He looked like a man who had been awake for years and had stopped remembering what sleep was. His eyes found hers, the same 4 seconds as 6 years ago, the same completed sentence. He looked away first. "Sit," he said, "if you want. You don't have to." She sat, cross-legged, across from him, the oil lamp between them. The cold from the corridor did not enter here. The warmth of the room had a quality she associated with old fires. Not one fire's warmth, but the accumulated warmth of fires that had burned in succession in this space for a very long time. "Your beast has been quiet for 300 years, she said. She had not planned to say this. The listening was doing what it sometimes did when she was in direct proximity to its source, bypassing the careful filter she had developed and speaking before she could stop it. He went very still. "That's what you've been holding," she said, more quietly. "That's the frequency I've been feeling from the pack house for months. It's not your own grief. It's older than you. It predates you by at least 317 years, he said, by our records. The last alpha whose beast spoke." She looked at him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the lamp flame, and there was something in his face that was beyond exhaustion. The kind of pain that was so established it had become structural. "It spoke to me," she said. "I heard it." He closed his eyes. He kept them closed for long enough that she began to wonder if he had heard her, or if hearing her was something he could not immediately manage. "I know," he said. "That's why you're here." The history of the silent beast was not part of the pack's common knowledge. Mira had pieced it together over years of listening from the land, from the old stone chamber where the elder council met, from the burial ground at the northern edge of territory where a name carved deeper than the others had nearly been worn smooth. The beast was not a metaphor. In the old tradition, the Alpha's wolf was understood as 2 distinct entities sharing one body, the man and the beast, the wolf self that carried the pack's spiritual authority. Most alphas experienced this as a unity, the beast's instincts indistinguishable from their own, the wolf and the man thinking and acting as one. But in certain bloodlines, old bloodlines, the ones that went back to the pack's founding, the beast was more distinct, more autonomous, more capable of independent judgment, independent grief, independent silence. 317 years ago, the Alpha, whose name was carved deepest at the northern burial ground, had sustained a wound that had nothing to do with claws or teeth. He had made a decision. The elders' records called it the Great Refusal, and they were deliberately vague about its nature, and his beast had responded to that decision by going silent. Not gone. The beast had not separated or died. It had simply stopped speaking, stopped engaging, retreated to some interior chamber, and held itself absolutely still. This silence had passed down through the bloodline, not to every generation. It skipped, emerged, receded, but when it came fully. The beast present but unreachable, like a fire burning behind glass you could not break. Calder had inherited it. She knew this now. sitting across from him in the lamplight, her hands open on her knees in the posture she used when she was actively listening. She knew this the way she knew the temperature of water by touching it. The beast in him was not silent in the way of absence. It was silent in the way of something that had been waiting a very specific kind of a very long time. The way a note held too long became almost indistinguishable from silence until you realized what was missing from the room. How long, she said, not as a question, as an invitation to speak. Since I took the alpha mantle, he said. Before that it was muted, distant. I thought it was just who I was. Then the mantle came, and it was like he stopped. The lamp flame leaned toward him slightly, the way flames sometimes did in rooms with complex drafts. Like a room where someone has been standing that is now empty, and you can feel the exact shape of them in the air, she said. Your pack can feel it. He looked at her then, the first direct, sustained look since she had entered. They don't know what they're feeling, she said. They think the edge in the air is the season, or politics, or the border tensions. But it isn't. When a pack's alpha beast goes silent, the pack's body starts to compensate, work harder. The wolves run more aggressive patrols than necessary. The mated pairs pull closer. The elders start resurrecting old arguments because the irritability needs somewhere to go. You've been watching this happen. For 2 years, he said, since I took the mantle. She breathed in slowly. The warmth of the room, the old fire quality of it. Did you know I could hear it? He was quiet for a long moment. The lamp flame leaned again, toward her this time, as if trying to close the distance between them. I knew something in the Western Territory could hear it, he said carefully. I didn't know it was you until what? Until I felt you stop at the tree line 8 weeks ago and stay. And the beast, he stopped again. His jaw worked. It's been 300 years. By all our records and all our histories, it has been 300 years since that silence was anything but silence. And when you stood at the tree line, it was not silent anymore. It was, I know what it was, she said quietly. She had felt it too. Standing at the tree line, hands on the cold earth, the deep frequency she had been cataloging for months had changed in quality from a held note to something beginning to resolve, like a chord finding its final tone. He had not told her this to ask her for something. She understood that. He was not a man who asked easily, and the particular difficulty of asking her, after 6 years of her erasure, an erasure he had been present for, at the beginning of, an erasure she had every reason to attribute to him. That difficulty was in his face clearly. He was telling her because she had arrived at his door with the information already in her body, and the alternative was to pretend she had not. You looked away, she said, 6 years ago, at the solstice ceremony. I know, Gregor said something to you. He was very still. I am not asking you to explain yourself, she said. She meant it. The years at the cottage had done something to her relationship with old grievances. Not dissolved them, but put them at a different distance. She could see the 6-year-old wound clearly, and she could see it from across a room rather than inside it. I am telling you what I observed because I think it's relevant. It's relevant, he said, and the roughness in his voice was more pronounced. Gregor told me you were. He said there were concerns about the Omega housing and certain members, and that several of the Elder Council had flagged a possible. He used the word irregularity. Irregularity, she repeated. About the bloodline, your mother's bloodline. He said there was a question about whether the listening gift was genuine, or... He stopped. He could not seem to finish this particular sentence. Fabricated, she said, to gain access to a dominant wolf. That is a very old slander against listening bloodlines. It requires believing that an Omega girl of 11 invented a gift and spent 8 years deploying it subtly before the moment when it would be most useful to claim it. She said this without heat. It was simply a fact, and she was accustomed to it. I know the history of that slander. My mother heard it too. The lamp flame between them had stopped leaning. It stood entirely straight, burning with a steadiness that felt deliberate. He was wrong, Calder said. I knew it then. Then, she said carefully. I knew it then, he said again. And there was something in his voice that would not be moved from this statement. I was 22 years old, with the alpha mantle 3 months, new, and my father's beta leaning in my ear. And I knew it, and I looked away anyway. He looked at the lamp. I have not stopped knowing it. She sat with this for a moment, the warmth of the room, the old fire quality, something in her chest that was neither the mate bond recognition nor the grief of its absence, but something that came after both. The tentative, frightening warmth of being accurately seen. Tell me what you need, she said. He looked at her. From me, she said, specifically. You sent the summons. You have a need. Tell me. He reached into the pocket of his shirt and produced something she had not expected. A small disc of pale stone, worn smooth. She recognized it as a piece of the old stone circle, not taken. She understood immediately, but given. The stone gave pieces of itself sometimes, to the Pax Alphas at moments of significant transition. She had felt the circle give something in the 4th year after the rejection, and had not known then what it had given, or to whom. He held it out. She did not take it immediately. She looked at it. It was warm from his body heat. The stone of the circle was never warm. It was the coldest stone in the territory. Winter and summer, part of what made it a place of truth-telling. This piece had been warm for 4 years. She could feel that the way she felt temperatures. Clearly, factually, without interpretation. The circle gave it to me, he said, after the ceremony after I looked away. It was in my hand when I got back to my chambers that night. I didn't take it. I know, she said. I've carried it since then, because I didn't know what else to do with it. And I felt strongly that I shouldn't put it down. She looked at him. He looked back. The completed sentence quality was still there. Had always been there, she suspected, on both sides, which was the cruelest and most instructive part of all of it. She took the stone. The warmth of it was immediate, and then something else. The low frequency she had been feeling from the direction of the pack house for months resolved into a note so clear, it briefly took her breath, not painful, the opposite, like the end of a sound you had been straining to hear and had finally fully heard. His breath left him in a long, controlled exhale. Across the oil lamp, his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. The cost of holding became briefly visible. It doesn't fix anything, she said. No, I need to understand what happened. With your beast, with the bloodline history, with what the pack has been compensating for. Before I can do anything useful, I need to understand the full shape of it. I know, he said, and you need to understand what I am, she said quietly. Not who I was 6 years ago, what I've become, what I can actually do. Because the listening is not a parlor trick, and it's not a convenience, and it is not a fabrication, he said. It is not a fabrication, it is a responsibility. It's been a responsibility since I was 11 years old, and I have carried it entirely alone, and if you need it now, you need to understand what you're asking. He met her gaze. The exhaustion in his face was still there. But underneath it, underneath the 2 years of the alpha mantle and the 300 years of the bloodline's silence and the 6 years of a wrong decision and its consequences, underneath all of that, something else. Something she recognized from standing outside old Marcus Vane's study window in the dark. Something that had been burning for a long time without burning out. Tell me, he said. So she did. She started with the headaches at 17. She told him about the floor pressing, the gradual cataloging, the specific frequencies she had learned to distinguish over years of involuntary attention. She told him about the discovery that the listening extended to the land itself, to the stone walls and the burial ground, and the old agreements the pack had made and largely forgotten. She told him about the springs that ran through grief, the weakened boundary that came from spiritual neglect, the places in the territory where the land was trying to communicate something the pack was too internally focused to hear. She told him about the 8 years of solitary development, the deliberate compression of her public presence, the third-party tithe account. She told him these things not as accusations. They were not accusations, but as information. He needed to understand what had been growing at the edge of his territory in the years. His attention had been directed elsewhere. He listened. He did not interrupt. He asked 1 or 2 quiet questions when something needed clarification. And his questions were good ones. Specific, attentive. The questions of someone who was genuinely trying to understand rather than trying to find the edges of what they needed to concede. When she reached the point in the telling where she described first hearing the beast's frequency from the direction of the pack house, he grew very still again in the held-down way. She described the progression. First dismissal, then cataloging, then the dawning understanding that the frequency was listening back. She described the moment 8 weeks ago at the tree line when the quality had changed. What did it feel like, he said, when it changed? She considered this. Like a question being answered, she said. Not question. A question that predated me by 300 years. He nodded. His hand had moved to rest on the floor beside him, palm down, the same posture she used when she was listening. She did not think he knew he was doing it. The beast recognized the listening bloodline, she said. Not me specifically, or not only me specifically, it recognized what I carry. It has been waiting for a listening bloodline Omega since the Great Refusal, he said. I've been through the Elder Council's records, all of them. The ones that were properly archived and the ones that were not. What did the Great Refusal actually involve? She said. The records I've accessed through the land were, the land holds grief and regret, not specifics. He was quiet for a moment. The lamp flame stood very straight. The Alpha who bears the name on the deepest stone, he said, had a listening bloodline mate. Her name was Asha. They were mated in the spring, and by the following winter, the Elder Council of the time had decided that her influence over the Alpha was destabilizing to pack governance. The listening was, it was threatening to the Council. An Alpha who could not be lobbied privately because his mate heard the pack's emotional truth and told him. An Alpha who knew what the land was saying about the Council's decisions. Mira was very still. The Council brought a formal charge against her. Fabrication of bloodline gift. Inappropriate influence over the Alpha. They offered the Alpha. They called it a choice. Sever the mate bond formally. Dissolve the recognition. Exile Asha from pack territory, or face a governance challenge from the 3 most senior BTAS, which would have meant war, Mira said, in winter, with the pack's most vulnerable members exposed. Yes, she breathed out slowly. He chose the pack. He chose the pack. He severed the mate bond. She left. He paused. The accounts say she died before the year was out. The grief of a severed mate bond, particularly in a listening bloodline. Yes, Mira said quietly. She did not need him to finish this. His beast went silent the same night he signed the formal severance document. It never spoke again, and the capacity for silence passed into the bloodline. She sat with this for a long time. The lamp, the warm room, the stone disc in her hand, smooth and warm, carrying 4 years of the Alpha's body heat. The Council did the same thing again, she said, 6 years ago. Gregor Tan was not acting alone. He was acting on Council instruction. She said this without drama. She had understood this for a while, in the way of things you have known for years, without letting yourself fully formulate. His silence confirmed it. They are very frightened of the listening, she said, in a way that is itself informative. Men who govern by managing information are threatened by those who can hear what information is being withheld. I have been working, he said, since the beginning of last year, to understand the full scope of what happened 6 years ago, and what happened 300 years ago. He met her gaze. I have been removing people from positions of authority, slowly, in ways that cannot be attributed to a single cause, because a single cause would create a united opposition. His jaw tightened. It is taking longer than I want it to. You have been doing this while managing a beast that cannot speak, and a pack that is compensating for that absence, she said. Yes, that's why you look like this, she said. He blinked. It was the first time she had seen anything pass across his face that was close to humor, a brief, tired flicker. I'm sure I look terrible. You look like a man carrying something that should be carried by two, she said. She did not say this with softness. It was a practical observation about weight distribution. He looked at the stone disc in her hands. What does it feel like when you hold it? It feels like the frequency resolving, she said, like a held note finding its tonic. She paused. Your beast can hear me right now, through the stone. Can you feel that? He closed his eyes. She watched his face for the shift. It came slowly, like ice releasing under a hand that has been pressed to it long enough. Something in the architecture of his expression opened by the smallest fraction. Not relief exactly, the beginning of something that relief would come after. Yes, he said. His voice had changed, still rough, still worn, but with something underneath it now that had not been there when she entered. I can feel it. The stone disc was warm in her palm. She turned it once, slowly, feeling the worn smoothness of it, thinking of the circle that had given it. The oldest stone in pack territory, older than the buildings, older than the formal pack structure, older, possibly, than the pack's specific memory of itself. The circle held things that the pack's official history did not. She had listened to it many times over the years, and heard things the elder records actively contradicted. I need to go back to the circle, she said, and I need access to whatever records the council has been keeping that are not in the formal archive. The ones about the bloodline history, about Asha. I know where they are, he said. I found them last autumn, and I need to walk the territory boundary, she said. The full boundary. There are agreements the pack made that have not been honored in a very long time. The land has been patient about it, but patient is not same as without consequence. What kind of consequence? The thinning you've seen at the eastern border, she said. The one your patrols have been overcompensating for that you cannot attribute to direct aggression from the neighboring pack. He stared at her. Yes, she said. That is not a territorial incursion. That is the land withdrawing a protection the pack stopped honoring. Walk the boundary with me, and I will show you exactly where the acknowledgments need to be remade and how. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, with the deliberateness of someone deciding something that had been sitting at the edge of decisions for a long time, he rose from the cross-legged position on the stone floor. He was taller than she remembered, not in the way of height changed, but in the way of height that had not been fully present before. Something in how he held himself that had loosened by the smallest amount and made room. He reached out his hand, not taking the stone back. She understood this clearly, offering something, an extension of the same conversation in gesture. She looked at his hand. She looked at the stone disc in her palm. She thought of the solstice ceremony, and the coal pressed against skin in the 4 seconds, and then the looking away, and she thought of the 11-year-old girl in the reassigned house and the 17-year-old with headaches and her hands on the floor. And she thought of the tree line and the kitchen garden and 6 years of building something entirely alone. Out of materials no one had given her. She was not a woman who needed to be rescued. That was not what was being offered. She understood this. What was being offered was something more precise and more difficult. Acknowledgement. Return. Not of what was taken. She had made herself out of the absence of those things, and she would not trade that self. But of what had been true all along, underneath the council's interference, and the young Alpha's wrong choice, and the 300-year-old grief in the bloodline. She put her hand in his. The stone disc rested between their palms. The frequency changed again, not resolving this time, resolved. A note held so long and so alone that when it finally found its partner note, the silence around it became something entirely different from what it had been. Not absence, completion. His breath came out slowly. Through the stone, through the listening, she felt the beast in him. That enormous, ancient, silent thing turned toward the sound of her, the way a flower turns towards sun it did not know was there. Not a sudden movement, a very old one resuming. "I owe you more than I can say in one night," he said. "You owe me a great deal," she agreed. "We will work out the specific accounting later." The hint of tired humor moved across his face again. Fuller this time. "Fair. I'll need the cottage I've been using formally recognized," she said, "and the territory allocation that goes with the listening bloodline acknowledgement. Your father gave my mother the appropriate terms, and those terms were stripped improperly, and I know the specific language that should be in the formal document, because I have spent years reading the original agreements through the land." "Done," he said. "And the Omega communal housing needs rebuilding," she said. "The damp wood. It's been that way for 12 years, and it communicates something specific about how the pack values certain members that—" "Done," he said. "I'll have a full list. I expect you will." She looked at him. He looked at her. The oil lamp between them had burned low. She had not noticed time passing. The room had that quality that rooms got. Sometimes when the conversation in them had been important enough to change the air. "The beast will not fully wake overnight," she said. "What's been silent for 300 years? It doesn't come back in one sitting. It will take time. It may take longer than either of us wants. I know I'll come back," she said. "Not because you're the alpha, not because of the mate bond, or not only. Because the pack needs the listening and the listening needs the pack, and I have been doing this work alone for long enough." She felt the weight of the words. True ones were heavier than comfortable ones. "And because what the circle gave you, it gave for a reason, and I am not in the habit of ignoring what the stone circle says." He was watching her with the full weight attention of a dominant wolf who has stopped pretending to look at something else. It was a great deal of attention. She had not been looked at this directly in a long time, and she let herself feel the full force of it without compressing it down to manageable size. It was allowed to be large. "What do you need from me?" he said, specifically. "Tonight." She considered the question seriously. Then she said, "Show me the records about Asha." He nodded. He crossed to the shelves against the wall and pulled a leather-bound volume from behind 2 others, hidden, but not as carefully hidden as it had once been. He brought it to the lamp and opened it, and she settled beside him on the floor with the stone disc still warm in her hand, and they began to read. The records were written in a hand she did not immediately recognize. Not the Elder Council's formal archive script, but something older, more personal. Someone had taken these records out of the official collection at some point and kept them separately, which was an act of deliberate preservation. The writing was dense and careful, and occasionally struck through with revisions, as if the person writing had been trying to find the precise word for something that resisted precision. Asha's name appeared first on the 7th page, introduced simply. The Alpha's mate, a listener of the old bloodline who comes to her gifts, not through training but through the land itself. Mira read this twice. She sounds like you, Calder said quietly, reading beside her. She sounds like all of us, Mira said. It's not a coincidence of personality. It's how the gift works. The land teaches it the same way every generation, because the land doesn't change the lesson. She read on, Asha at the spring circle, pressing her hands to the old stone, and telling the Alpha what the circle was saying about the pack's grief over a winter that had taken 3 elder women in quick succession. Asha at the boundary walk, identifying where an old agreement had been neglected and what the appropriate remediation was. The Alpha's accounts, because someone had written the Alpha's voice into these records, not just the official observations, described his mate with a quality Mira recognized from Stanton's outside old Marcus Vane's study window. The frequency of something that had been burning for a long time without burning out. And then the council's section, the formal language, the charge, the documents, and at the end, a single sentence in a different hand than the rest, smaller and less steady, written after the fact. She left on a gray morning in late autumn, and she did not look back, and I understood then what I had done. Mira sat with this for a long time. The lamp had burned to its lowest. The room was darker, warmer, carrying the particular quality of late night in an important place. He knew, she said. Yes, he knew, and he chose the pack anyway, and his beast judged him for it. Yes, she thought about this, about a choice made under enormous constraint, under the threat of winter war, with the pack's most vulnerable in the balance. About how a choice made under those conditions could be simultaneously understandable and unforgivable. About how a beast might understand the constraint and still not be able to speak past the grief of it. I don't think the beast judged him for the choice, she said slowly. I think it went silent because it was grief, not punishment. I think those two things look very similar from the outside. Calder was very still beside her. If it were punishment, she said, it would have transferred as punishment, an Alpha raised with the expectation of silence as consequence, as price for wrong choice. But that isn't what I feel when I listen to it. She pressed her palm flat against the floor. Old habit, the gesture of active listening. The floor of this room spoke clearly. All those fires burned into the stone over generations. All those Alphas walking across this floor, with the weight of decisions they had made. It feels like grief being carried forward because it had nowhere to go. Passed down because grief like that doesn't disappear, it inherits. Your bloodline has been carrying a grief that was never yours. She felt him turn this over. The lamp guttered once and steadied. Can it be put down, he said. I don't know, she said honestly. I've never done this before. The land has analogies. Places where old grief was carried in the soil from some wound the pack made generations back, and I've helped those resolve. But this is different in scale. She paused. I think it can be spoken to, named. The grief can be given language that it's been denied, and when grief gets language, it sometimes loosens. What would that look like? It would look like standing at the burial ground, she said, at the deepest name, and saying what happened fully without the official version, and letting whatever happens after that happen. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, when? At the winter solstice, she said, 6 weeks. Not because the timing is magical. Though the circle will be more open then. It's always more open at the solstice. But because you need those 6 weeks to do the governance work, the last pieces of the council restructuring, I'll walk the boundary with you, and we'll address the eastern deterioration, and you need to sleep. I sleep. You sleep the way people sleep when they have not permitted themselves to be fully unconscious for 2 years, she said. It's not the same thing. He looked at her, the exhaustion in his face, still present, but with something underneath it that had not been there. At the beginning of the night, you've been paying attention, he said. I pay attention to everything, she said. It is not optional. It is how the gift works. I know, he zahazed, and then more quietly, I'm sorry I didn't. She received this, not with the weight of 6 years of absence. That weight was real, and she would not pretend otherwise. But with the clear-eyed recognition that an apology from a man who genuinely meant it was different from one offered as social transaction. She had a gift for distinguishing between the two. She used it now. I know, she said. It was not forgiveness in the simple sense. It was acknowledgement. Something more useful. The night had gone very late. The lamp oil was nearly done. Mira rose from the floor with the stone disc still in her hand, and stood for a moment in the almost dark room, feeling the warmth of it. The accumulated fires, the specific quality of a place where something important had just happened. The beast in him moved. She felt it through the stone, through the listening. Not fully awake, not after 300 years of silence, but differently positioned than it had been, turned towards something. Alert in the way of something that has just been told it is not alone. She pressed the stone disc back into his hand. He looked down at it, then up at her. I'll return in 3 days, she said, with the full list of what the territory agreements require, and you'll have the formal recognition documents ready. Yes, he said, and the Omega housing, I'll contact the builder tomorrow. Good. She turned toward the door. At the threshold, she paused. Not for drama, but because the listening had given her one more thing, and she had learned never to withhold what the listening gave at significant moments. She turned back. She didn't die of grief, she said. Asha, the records say she did, but the land says something different. The land remembers her, not a death, a going. She went deep into the territory's oldest wood, and she put her hands on the oldest tree, and she put what she carried into it. And it's still there. Her listening didn't end. It rooted. She paused. You can feel it if you know where to press. I can show you. He stood in the low lamplight with the stone disc in his hand, and his shoulders, the slightly altered shape of something that had been holding for 2 years and had lost a fraction of that hold. And he looked at her the way she had been looked at exactly once, 6 years ago, for 4 seconds across a fire circle, with recognition so complete it had nowhere else to go. Show me, he said. She walked the boundary the following morning, alone first. She rose before light, dressed in layers against the cold, took the path she had walked 100 times in the years of her self-imposed distance, but this time walked it differently. Not as the forgotten Omega, mapping the territory she was permitted to occupy, but as the listening, walking the full circuit of what was hers to know. The eastern deterioration was immediately apparent to her senses. Not visible, you could walk that section of boundary and see only the normal tree line, the normal spacing between the marker stones, the normal cold ground. But under her boot soles, the quality of the land changed, like a place where water has been diverted away, and the ground has begun slowly to forget what wet felt like. She pressed her palms to the earth at the weakest point and listened. The old agreement was simple, not complex magic, not the kind of thing that required elaborate ritual. It required the Alpha's acknowledgement of the boundary's validity, performed at the marker stones, at each equinox and solstice, with specific language that had been part of the Pack's ceremonial tradition, and had been quietly dropped from the formal ceremony sometime in the last 40 years. Dropped, she was fairly certain, Around the same time, the Elder Council had begun the process of streamlining the solstice ceremony into something that required less of the Alpha's personal participation. She made notes. She had always been a good note-taker. Years of cataloging what the listening gave her had made her methodical. She wrote down the specific locations, the specific language she could reconstruct from the land's memory of the old performances, the specific sequence of acknowledgments that would need to be made to restore what had been withdrawn. She also walked to the north, to the burial ground. She stood at the deepest name for a long time. The carving was worn as she had known, but the letters were not entirely illegible. She traced them with her fingers. The stone beneath the name had a quality distinct from the other markers, older, more inhabited, as if 300 years of being the destination of grief had made it porous to something. She did not try to listen deeply here, not alone, not yet. This was not a wound she could address by herself. This was the one that required the Alpha present. She found the oldest wood at mid-morning. It was in the territory's southwestern corner, a small stand of oaks, so old their bark had turned silver gray, and their roots were larger in circumference than her whole body. She had known this place for years. She had listened here often and always felt the quality she thought of as depth, as if the oaks were rooted deeper than other trees, reaching down into something that predated the pack itself. She put her palms against the largest oak. Asha was there, not as a voice, not as a presence in any anthropomorphic sense, but as a frequency, warm and steady and extremely old, the same warmth as the oil lamp room, but more ancient, more fully resolved. Listening put to rest, grief given language and roots, and 300 years of quiet work in the dark. Mira pressed her forehead against the silver bark and let herself feel it for a long time. The accumulated warmth, the sense of a gift used fully, to its last application, wasted on nothing, she thought. I am not the first. I am not the last. I am the one here now, she thought. That is enough. She walked back to the pack boundary, and then toward home, toward the cottage and the kitchen garden, and the cold that came in through the boot soles. And she thought about what she was going to say to him in 3 days, and what she was going to say to the Elder Council when the time came, which would be soon, and what it meant to be a listening bloodline Omega who had spent 6 years in deliberate obscurity, and was now, with her own hands and her own knowledge, and no one else's permission, stepping back into the light of what she had always been. The stone circle was visible from the crest of the hill she was climbing. In the winter morning light it was gray and absolute, the standing stones unambiguous against the sky. She did not stop, but she looked at it as she walked, and she felt the circle look back in the way it did. Not attention exactly, but awareness. The way old things are aware of what moves near them. She understood now why the circle had given the stone disk to him on the night of the ceremony, not as comfort and not as promise, as commission. The circle had known then what the Elder Council could not prevent forever. That the listening bloodline would return to the pack's center because the pack's center needed what the listening carried, and because certain things that had been done under duress 300 years ago deserved to be undone fully, with all the knowledge that time and patience had gathered. She reached the cottage at noon. The kitchen garden was dormant, the beds mulched against the cold. She made tea. She sat at the table with her notes spread in front of her, and the winter light coming in through the small window, and she began to write the document that would form the basis of the formal bloodline recognition. Not asking for it, not petitioning for it, but laying out the terms of it, what the listening bloodline contributed, what it required in return, what the formal recognition documents should contain, and what they must not omit. She wrote for several hours. When she was done, she set the pen down and looked at what she had produced and thought, yes, this is accurate. This is what is owed, and what can be given, and what I am willing to carry. She folded the notes and set them aside for the morning. Outside the window, the afternoon light was going gold, and then gray, the quick winter sunset. Somewhere in the direction of the pack house at a distance, she could feel precisely. By now the beast called Van was not silent in the same way it had been this time yesterday. It was still quiet. 300 years did not undo in a single night. But the quality of the quiet had changed. It was the quiet of something that had moved, recently, toward a sound it recognized. The quiet of something that knew it had been heard. She put her hands on the table, flat, palm down. Not formal listening, just contact. The ordinary warmth of wood and her own warmth meeting. The frequency from the direction of the pack house was steady, turned toward her, as steady things turn toward steady things. She sat in the winter evening, in the cottage she had built into a home, out of materials no one had given her, and she let herself feel the full scope of what was coming, not with anxiety, and not with the particular compressed carefulness she had worn for 6 years like a second skin, with the thing that came after both of those, that had no name except the warmth of it, readiness, clear-eyed and complete. She had been forgotten. She had made herself, inside the forgetting, into something that remembered everything. She would not be forgotten again, not because anyone would prevent it, because she was done participating in her own erasure, and she had been the most essential participant all along, and when she stopped, the erasure stopped. And what remained was this: a woman with her palms on a wooden table in the winter light, listening to a land that had always known her name, connected at last to the beast that had been waiting 300 years for exactly this frequency. The cold came in through the window's edge. She did not mind it. She had learned to read cold by now, what it held, what it promised, what season it was carrying. This cold's the kind that preceded a thaw. It had the quality of something about to change. She kept her hands on the table and waited without impatience for morning.